showing we're live on Facebook, so welcome everybody. We'll give folks a minute or so to find us. If you're here for the 1:00 p.m. Eastern Time, 12 Central livecast with Mindful Ohio and the Institute for Creative Mindfulness featuring Dr. Orixa Bowers today, you are in the right place. So I'm just going to take a minute to make sure where we need to be online, and hopefully you are settling in to find us for this a conversation that I know I am super excited about having today. So, all right. All right, so it looks like we got a few of our folks who are preparing to be here settled in. So I'll go ahead and formally get us started, and hopefully more people will continue to join us, because if you do have questions in real time, I encourage you to post them here on the Facebook livecast, and I'll be happy to pass along your comments or questions to Orixa. This is a amazing topic that I really think needs to be discussed right now, especially with this climate of rhetoric that we have. So again, I'm Dr. Jamie Marich. I'm with Mindful Ohio and the Institute for Creative Mindfulness. I've been happy all year to be hosting these live casts to have important conversations about what is going on culturally and in our field. And I'm very happy to be joined today by my friend, Dr. Orixa Bowers from Memphis, Tennessee. So Orixa is a dancing mindfulness facilitator trainer. I met her primarily through dancing mindfulness work. And on our retreats, which are typically held here live in the spring in Ohio, Orixa has presented just some fascinating material over the years. And a few retreats ago, she did a presentation on the topic at hand today, reproductive justice. And it was an absolute game changer for me as somebody who grew up in a very conservative pro-life model, and then with my professional work and continued growth really moved into more of a pro-woman model. And I was not really familiar with this concept of reproductive justice, and hearing Orixa teach on it was just a game changer for me. So with everything happening with reproductive rights being politicized, we need to have this conversation now. So welcome, Orixa.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for having me back again. I really always enjoy spending time with you. And, you know, I recall the moment where we were having this conversation on the retreat, and yourself and so many other folks in the room just were kind of sharing their stories, and just, you know, just going through and really having some purposeful and meaningful conversations around, you know, the ways that they were thinking about their reproductive health rights and access to resources, and just, you know, just kind of going through and saying, you know, I never really thought about this in this particular context. And so it's just been really helpful to have platforms to really present on this, and, you know, celebrate the work of other folks who are reproductive justice mothers and our elders in this work. So I'm excited to be here today to talk with y'all about this.
So let's start with what is meant by reproductive justice, which is sometimes shortened as RJ.
Correct. So reproductive justice is a human rights framework that centers the lived experience of Black women. It is set on a core set of principles, which include that every individual has the right to decide if and when they will have a baby, and the conditions under which they will give birth, adopt, or parent that child. Every individual has a human right to decide if they will not have a baby, and their options for preventing or ending a pregnancy. Every individual has a human right to parent the children that they already have, if they're parents, and have access to the necessary social supports in safe environments and healthy communities without fear of violence from individuals or from the state. Individuals have a human right to their own bodily autonomy, free from all forms of reproductive oppression and coercion. Individuals have a human right to express their sexuality and spirituality without violence or shame. And every individual has a human right to a quality of life and sustainability before and beyond the ability to give birth or parent. So essentially, RJ is about a holistic and comprehensive life where a person has access to all of the resources that they determine that they need to thrive and be happy in life.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not just about sex or sexuality, although that is a part of reproductive justice. People have a right to make decisions about their life and about their body, and they have a right to know the information in order to make those decisions.
Beautifully put. So personal autonomy is really the emphasis. And
Yes.
something that strikes me about this model is I think when we hear that phrase reproductive rights, we can automatically go to, well, we're talking about abortion or we're talking about birth control. But this also means access to, like you said, to become a parent in whatever way you see fit. And
Correct.
so this framework of reproductive justice, let's say, applies to people who are struggling with infertility, is something that I
Absolutely.
really, got out of your initial talk. It,
Absolutely.
it, it applies to, adoption rights, that it really spans the whole realm of the human experience here.
Correct. Like, for example, we have a lot of conversations around the LGBT community and their ability to create the families that they desire to have.
Mm-hmm.
Who's a good parent and who's not a good parent, and etc. But RJ allows us to open our minds. It gives us a framework that allows us to imagine and create families and chosen family, whatever means we decide to use to create those families or not, because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's also important that, like, parenting is not everyone's goal. It's just really not. And so it allows us to open our minds in a way that allows for people to create the kind of life that they want for themselves, to have the information, comprehensive sexuality education for young people to learn about their bodies, that the desire to have sex is a natural desire that starts earlier in life than we really want to acknowledge, right? And it doesn't end because a person becomes a certain age, like people have sex. Things like this that we kind of place in these boxes. RJ allows us to obliterate those boxes and let people be whole people, where you are able to live out your life with the resources that you need and the information you need to be able to do that in a way that works for you as a person, versus me speaking over people's choices or what they choose to do or not do.
It's
So
probably one of the reasons I resonated with this model, or this framework, is, like you said, it's about obliterating boxes, which I think is totally amazing. And I mean, I remember when I was listening to your talk, I was impacted on two fronts. One, because of the way in which I grew up and having to get over a lot of this messaging about, well, you have to be pro-life to be Christian. And the other issue is how I made a decision, or the decision made me several years back, that I was not meant to have my own natural children in this life. And I had been raised in this mindset that you need that to be a woman, that defines you as being a woman. And I remember when I got to the place of being able to say no, like I always share the story that I heard as clear as a bell that my job in this life is to take care of other people's children, both through my work, and I have stepchildren and godchildren, and it was just so powerful for me. But I knew that immediately that would open me up to criticism from the larger sphere of opinion. And I've really had to learn that opinion doesn't matter, because this life is my own. And I know where I'm making my difference with my mother energy. Just because I've never biologically given birth, I do still consider myself as having that maternal energy. So I just love so much of this emphasis on the model as ditching boxes. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. So, Orixa, tell us how you got into this work.
How I actually happened upon reproductive justice. I was unaware that I was doing reproductive justice. And so I started off as an advocate for people who live with HIV and AIDS. And many moons ago, I started volunteering in that community, making sure that folks who were living with HIV and AIDS were able to, have advocacy options, testing, access to care, and things of that nature. And so I've gone, run the gamut of all of the different facets of doing that work. And when I met Cherise Scott, who actually she and I attended the same high school, she started a reproductive justice organization here in Memphis. And I received an award from Sister Reach for the work that I had been doing in reproductive health around abortion access and access to HIV care, treatment, and education. And when I was offered this award, the opportunity to receive this award, one of the things that they said, or the theme for that year, was RJ at the margins. RJ at the intersections was the theme, I believe. And it was about celebrating the fact that there are people who are doing reproductive justice and not even realizing that that's what they're doing. And so I became a volunteer for Sister Reach. I went through their educational programs and later became a staff person at Sister Reach following that. But I was taught by one of the great RJ leaders about what reproductive justice is, and ways in which I was already doing it and didn't realize it. And so once I became knowledgeable and had a stronger analysis and was able to apply the RJ framework to the work that I was already doing, things just kind of continued on from there. And I now work in the movement of harm reduction, which is still very closely tied to reproductive justice, because if we really embrace that framework, it includes all of the work that we do. It includes literally all of the work that we do. If we truly believe that people can be autonomous and have a right to self-actualize, then that's RJ, right? And so I am very grateful to those RJ leaders who poured into me and taught me about reproductive justice and embraced the work that I was doing as a community advocate around HIV/AIDS.
Marvelous connection with this emphasis on autonomy. So I have to ask, and before I ask Orixa this question, just want to remind anybody who's watching online right now, I see several of you are live. If you have a question or a comment that you want to pass along, please go ahead, put it in the comments. I'm monitoring those. So Orixa, if we can, dig a little deeper here, I want to know, how's it feeling right now in this climate with Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death and this discussion about shifting the Supreme Court, and everybody seeming to have an opinion about what's right for women? How are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling, I have to be honest and say that I'm feeling pretty nervous. As we know, Justice Ginsburg was a staunch supporter of women's ability to make choices for themselves, and there's no question about this. And so with these opportunities to appoint another justice, that I'm concerned it's a shift in power that with the wrong decision can mean that we move the clock back for the progress of women's rights and women's access to make decisions and resources. And so I'm like super concerned about that. In addition, I mean, there's no way to get around to have this conversation without talking about the racial implications that are going on. There's so much social unrest in our communities where folks of color are under attack, are being surveilled, are being we just are experiencing things at this point in time that are an unprecedented amount of violence that's going on in our community. And I mean, all of those things concern me, being a Black woman in the South, raising Black children in the South, having daughters, having a granddaughter, like all of those specifically around women. All of those things are of concern to me because, again, we've been fighting. When I say we, I mean women of all walks of life. We've been fighting for the right to make our own decisions over our own bodies for a while now, you know, a good little while. And so it's extremely concerning that there's the potential for people to lose access to very important life-saving resources. And I would be remiss to not acknowledge the implications for Black women in particular. I mean, I know that we've seen a lot of violence in our community, you know, across the board, but just this war on Black women's bodies continues to be pervasive in our community.
Yeah. So if we can go a little deeper even with that, because, you know, I've said in a lot of my political opinions and postings that I've put up that I think one of the greatest lies I was taught as a kid coming up through school is that there's a separation of church and state in this country, that, you know, we're not a theocracy, that something that makes America great is a separation between church and state. But I have just never seen that when it comes to women. I haven't. And I mean, I know religious folks, you know religious folks, and I still to my core believe that people are entitled to their beliefs, but not at the expense of you legislating that over everybody else and calling it religious freedom. And I don't know, the more I've done some of my unpacking on this, because as I shared at the beginning of this live cast, I got the pro-life rhetoric from both sides of my spiritual heritage. I have an evangelical parent, I have a Catholic parent. And the interesting thing is the two movements within Christianity are suspicious of each other, but they're both on the, you know, board about the fact that abortion is evil in all of its forms and whatnot. And I was steeped in all of this rhetoric and so much of the, you know, it's murder, it's murder, it's murder, and no other moral issue is as bad as this. And then as I started to A, heal my own trauma, and B, work with other traumatized women, I really started to form this conclusion that going there automatically with the whole, well, you know, at least we don't murder babies, which is often where the rhetoric goes very violently, gives you your card to pull out, so to speak, to look at any issues of real moral complexity. That it's never as simple as that. It is never as simple as that. And I mean, I could go on and on about how can you claim to be pro-life when you're pro everything else that a lot of religiously driven policy stands for. I mean, it just boggles my mind. But I don't know if you have anything you want to share about kind of this separation of church and state non-existing issue, what this is about, this control we want to have over women's bodies.
Well, I do have thoughts about that. You know, my question to people who purport that they're pro-life, for me, my question then becomes, what part of life? Because if we are going to move past the point of fetuses and think about what life really means, what happens to those babies once they are born?
Yeah.
You know, these, as you stated, we have all these policies about abortion. But okay, if we do away with those policies, if we do away with that particular service, what happens to those individuals when they're born? What we are also the same, these same legislators are cutting programs that allow us to be able to assist children. There's the early education program cut. There's you know, funding for schools and schools reform, education reform cut. There's funding for, food programs and different type of programs that assist children throughout their formative years. That funding is cut. There's no legislation that is protecting children who are going into social service programs or state run programs. Where are the pro-life people once these babies are born? Mm-hmm. I am of the mindset that sometimes, we like to use this phrasing of, babies are gifts. They are gifts, but sometimes in life we have to give gifts back. We're not able to properly take care for, manage those gifts. And so for me, in my thinking, sometimes for some people, the selfless act of ending a pregnancy is about the restoration of their gift. It is about thinking about the life of the person. Where the life of the person who has become impregnated. What does pro-life really mean? Whose life, right? Which again is like Black Lives Matter. Okay, whose life matters? I have questions when it comes to the separation of church and state. It's like, okay, as you stated, whose bodies are we legislating over? Whose lives are we prioritizing? And where is the support that comes after the fact? Yes, we can legislate and we can do policy and we can analyze and overanalyze around when life starts, etc. Well, we know that after a child is born, that life. So where is the pro-life person then? Where are the marches then? Bring these children. We force women to bring these children through to life outside the womb. Where's the support then? Whose life is being prioritized at that point? Now we have two lives to consider. If we want to separate women from their fetuses. So, I mean, for me, it's like, it's just a series of, it just opens the door for more and more and more and more and more questions. And it also makes me wonder, who benefits from the commodification of women's bodies? Follow the money. Who benefits? Who benefits? What are we really populating? Are we populating communities or are we populating jails? Because we continue to criminalize people for these various figures, whether it be abortions, whether it be drug use, whether it be, protesting, whatever it is that people do, whatever their behavior is, we continue to criminalize them. And who benefits from that criminalization? So for me, it just makes me ask even more and more and more questions, based on what people say they're about or what say they stand for.
And to anybody who may be watching this, who would still tune into my stuff, that is pro-life for religious reasons, I would ask you this, and I'm intoning the words here of Pastor Nadia Bolz-Weber. I think I may have brought this up on our last live cast, and it was a big theme in the Trauma and the 12 Steps book, which is her contention that our drug of choice as a society seems to be thinking that we're better than other people.
Yes.
I'm guilty of that. I mean, I could definitely be guilty of that, especially around issues of addiction recovery, and I can get on my high horse as someone who's sober. I mean, I think that's a human tendency, but amongst a lot of the folks I grew up with and came up with, I think there's this, I've just heard it so many times, but at least we don't murder babies. And you go to the most sensational language possible, and it gives you your card, you're out, like I said, to really look at anything else that may be morally devastating. And I just remember, even when I was doing some and any work I've done around pro-life advocacy, on one hand, I have some shame about it. On the other hand, I know it was a trauma reaction for me. I was doing what I was told to think, this is what I had to do to stay in God's grace and whatever. And I remember, like, even in crisis pregnancy counseling models within the pro-life movement, there's this idea that you can be pro-woman or pro-baby. And you will actually probably save more babies if you're pro-woman. And of course, there are some crisis pregnancy models that rail against that, you know, it's the baby, the baby, the baby. But that is one of the things from that work I really took with me. And I'll never forget the turning point case I had as a clinician, where I was working with a woman who I was in my internship, and she was coming through with a crisis pregnancy. And I knew on one hand everything the church would have wanted me to say. And on the other hand, it was, no, that's not what you're here for in this role. You're a clinician in a state agency. You are to be there for your client, period. And in that moment is what I knew who I really was and what I was about. And that was being there to serve the people in front of me, period. And incidentally enough, she did keep her baby. And, you know, that was never my goal. But I think there's something worth looking at, that they're like, who are we doing this for? You know, is it for women? And I know for me, and that moment is when I declared that I am pro-woman unapologetically. And what that also means to me is that if a woman has a traumatic reaction from an abortion, she deserves care for that too.
That's right.
That, I mean, yes, I think the pro-life movement could sometimes blow that out of proportion, that every woman suffers after having an abortion. But the reality is, I've seen it go both ways, where some women have their healing and then they move on with their lives. Some women get really stuck in the struggle of what they, you know, the choice they made. And my role as somebody who's trauma informed and pro-woman is, I am there to provide care for her, whatever she may need.
Right. And so, and then my question becomes for those who, you know, like, if you really want to know how a person feels, let's not assume, let's ask them.
Yeah.
And, you know, I appreciate Goodmarker Institute for doing that work. Like, that work exists. There are research studies out there where we have taken the time to ask women what was their reaction, what were their feelings following abortion, and time again, I want to say the study was like 70 to 80 something percent women who were asked stated that they felt relief because choices for their life had been honored. They had done what they needed to feel they needed to do for their lives. And, you know, let's be clear that, you know, we make a lot of assumptions about, you know, a person and how they how one might come to the decision to have an abortion. Like, every person who has an abortion, every pregnancy isn't an unintended pregnancy. Unintended doesn't mean unwanted. You know, we make judgment calls in places where we have no business. And what I love about what you said about being pro-woman is recognizing that if this person is good, they're going to make the decision that they need to make for their life. And our professional commitment as clinicians or as, you know, care support folks, our role is to support that person's decisions, not make their decision for them. They know we have to trust people. We have to trust women. We have to trust Black women. We have to trust folks to make the decisions that are best for in their best interest. And it's my job to, you know, to name that for a person. It just isn't.
Yeah, and if we feel we have to, I think that's more about getting our own power and control needs met.
That's right.
Which, you know, results from unhealed trauma, if you will, and the cycle continues. So I have a question for you. One of our viewers is asking, what do you view as the greatest obstacles currently to reproductive justice, either overall or for a particular population? And I think this is the important part of the question, because we've talked about some of the obstacles. What can we do to assist to overcome these? You know, we as clinicians, people who work in public health, people who are pro-woman, what can we do right now, today, in this 2020 madness in which we find ourselves?
I believe we could do three things. One is continue to educate ourselves on these concepts of reproductive justice, making sure that we fully understand what that means and how they can translate into our everyday practices. I think the second thing that we could do is truly use the skills that we have. We need to actively listen to people. We need to shut off our internal talk and shut off our expertise, right? That can become a barrier, thinking I know best, based on my experience or my training. We need to shut that off and actually listen to people and allow them to name for themselves what it is that they truly need. Because I do feel like sometimes we come into a conversation feeling like we know what predicting what they're gonna ask us for, how to show up. And then the third thing is really be open to accountability. In our community, especially, and I don't know if the person who asked the question is a white person, but I'm going to say this, very unapologetically, like, check our privilege. And that goes for white folks. It also goes for folks of color, because we all sit in a place of privilege at different points in time. We all possess privilege in some type of a setting. But check our privilege and recognize that everything that I have access to, the next person may not have access to that. And figuring out how to be a doorway instead of, a door that swings in both directions, a door that just locks. How do we keep ourselves malleable so that we're able to really navigate people to what they need in our communities, whether we possess it or making the relationships to connect them to others who possess what they need.
Very, very well stated. Oh, I feel like I can talk forever. Yet I think, as we kind of wrap this up, it's important to recognize that a lot is at stake. I believe now more than ever that women have come far in so many ways, but because of what has happened politically, there is a real threat here to be rolled back. And I mean, something else I felt compared to share, and this is again having been on the inside of a lot of pro-life church-based thinking, is if you are a religious person watching this, you've likely heard the message that, well, we are pro-woman because it's a woman's birthright to have children. And as I've already shared from my story, I've learned that's just not authentic for a lot of us, and we're making a lot of those assumptions culturally. Or people will say, well, we are pro-woman because the traumatic fallout from having an abortion is a given. And I would say, if you're being given that information, look at the source.
Yes.
Because studies that are funded largely by pro-life or quote unquote pro-family coalitions tend to be very skewed. And I think things can be skewed on the other side too, don't get me wrong. So I think check your sources, first of all, from whatever it is. Look at things that are as scientifically, not kind of, but things that are as scientifically validated as possible. And fundamentally realize that the person who's coming through your door is not a statistic. Whether you're working with them as a clinician, whether you're a pastoral figure working with them. And like you said, Orixa, they may be feeling a great deal of relief that my choice was honored. So don't put your stuff on them, especially if you are a pastoral counselor, if you're even a mainstream clinical counselor who's very religiously charged in your work. Honor what that person is telling you about the impact any of their choices may have made on their life. And like, I just love how you said, don't make assumptions.
That's right. I wanted to say something else too, to something that you mentioned. Like, okay, I identify as a person who is Christian, but I also co-identify as an omnist, meaning that, yes, I recognize every person is not a person of faith, right? Some people are people of non-faith. Some people are Catholic, some are Christian, some are, Episcopal. They're every denomination of Christian that can be. They have, they're Muslim. They may have other belief structures in place, but at the core of, when we get past all of that, how we identify religiously through doctrine, we are people. And so again, honoring my professional commitment does not require us to agree about what we on doctrine. This is a person. They're coming to me for a specific request. Can I honor their request? And if I'm not able to, again, giving the person who is on as a provider, if I'm not able to honor and respect what they're requesting, find a person within your organization who can. It's okay to not be able to do something.
Yeah.
It's something that I taught a lot when I was doing non-directional, non-directive abortion referrals for folks.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay if I don't believe. It's okay if you don't believe in something. It's okay that
Mm-hmm.
you know if you're a pro-life person, you go right ahead and be pro-life. But you go and find a person who is able to deliver that service, and you
Mm-hmm.
transition, you warm hand that person over to them. You know.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just saying that in relationship to your question about what is it that
Right.
you can do. What you can do is you can honor your own values, and that means you get out of the way and you warm hand this person over to someone who can honor their values, because when I'm coming to you for a service, it isn't about you, it's about me. And so that's the thing. It's another thing that I feel like it's very simple. No one's asking anyone to give up their own personal values, and it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
finish me at all as a person to honor my own values and say, you know what, I cannot do this. Jamie, this is a person who needs this service.
Mm-hmm.
Can you assist them?
Mm-hmm.
Find a person within your practice. If you don't have them within your practice, maybe you need to do some hiring or do some recruitment.
Right.
You know, but make it, create a doorway where
Mm-hmm.
people can still get what they need, and you can still hold on to your personal values, your personal beliefs, and you're not infringing on someone else's personal values or their beliefs. Hey, friend,
Yeah, it's a
I
Misty.
got something to say.
Misty joins us for a lot of these. So yeah, I just really think it's a good place to wrap up this whole idea of being a doorway to meet people exactly where they're at, and to take a good hard look, especially with so many of these issues that are either gray areas or there's just moral, I don't even call them moral gray areas, there's just moral complexity involved.
Yes, meet them where
Um,
they are, but don't leave them there.
right. Uh, you know, you got to look at what's about you and what's really about everybody else. And again, so much I could say, but we may have
Yes,
to do another one of these at some other point,
I'm here when you. I'm here whenever
especially
you.
as the flow of what's going on in this nation just continues to get more complicated. So, Dr. Isha, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you as
And
well.
until we meet again.
Yes.